The night was quiet when they came. A village in West Africa slept peacefully beneath the stars, completely unaware that the course of history was about to tear it apart. Fires burned low. Casting a soft glow, children were lost in their dreams, elders. Their voices like whispers in the dark shared the old stories that connected them to generations past. Then, a sound shattered the silence, the sound of feet. Fast, heavy, unfamiliar. By dawn, the village was gone. Men, women, and children were brutally dragged from their homes. Their sleep turned into a nightmare. Their hands were bound with rough, abrasive rope. Ankles bled where cold iron had bitten into their skin. The air filled with the heart-wrenching screams of mothers as their children were torn from their arms. They walked for days, sometimes weeks, on a grueling journey toward the coast. The sun beat down on them. The earth was hard beneath their bare feet, and exhaustion was a constant enemy. Anyone who stumbled and fell was left behind. Anyone who dared to resist was killed without a second thought. This path, stained with suffering, became known as the Road of No Return, because for millions, it truly was. At the shore, colossal wooden ships waited like monsters rising from the water. The captives, exhausted and terrified, were herded onto these vessels and forced below deck. Imagine being packed into a dark, suffocating space, chained shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of others. There was no room to sit upright, let alone stand. There was no light to pierce the oppressive darkness. The air was thick and foul, a suffocating mixture of sweat, fear, and human waste. Disease spread like wildfire in these horrific conditions: smallpox, dysentery. Fevers, they claimed countless lives. The smell of sickness and death was a constant, inescapable presence. In the suffocating blackness, some prayed to their gods for deliverance. Some screamed until their voices were raw. And some, seeing no escape, chose the deep ocean over a life in chains, leaping overboard in a final act of defiance. This journey, the Middle Passage, remains one of the deadliest forced migrations in all of human history. So many did not survive the crossing. For those who did live through the unimaginable horrors of the voyage, another nightmare awaited them in foreign lands. They were treated not as people, but as objects to be bought and sold. Standing on auction blocks, men were inspected like livestock. Their teeth were checked. Their muscles prodded and pulled, their bodies assessed for their capacity for hard labor. Women were sold not only for their labor, but also for horrific abuse, their bodies objectified and violated. Perhaps the cruelest cut of all was the separation of families. Children were ripped away from their parents, often to never see them again. The bonds of family, the very core of their society, were deliberately shattered. Everything that made them who they were was systematically stripped away. Their names were taken and replaced. Their languages were forbidden, silenced by the threat of the whip. Their cultures, their beliefs, their traditions all were beaten out of their bodies. They were told, day after day, that they were no longer human. They were property. Life on the plantations was a relentless cycle of brutal labor. The days began long before the sun rose and ended well after it had set. The backbreaking work in the fields, planting, tending, and harvesting crops like sugar, cotton, and tobacco was enforced by the constant threat of violence. The crack of the whip was a tool used not just to inflict pain, but to enforce silence and submission. Punishments were often public spectacles, designed to break the spirits of everyone who witnessed them as much as the bodies of those who endured them. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming cruelty, the human spirit refused to be extinguished. Even in chains, the enslaved people resisted. They found ways, both big and small, to fight back. They whispered stories of their homes in Africa, keeping their memories and heritage alive in the darkness. They sang songs filled with hidden meanings, creating a secret language of hope and defiance that their captors could not understand. They planned escapes, running toward a freedom they might never reach. But a chance they had to take, they even organized rebellions, daring to rise up against their oppressors. Knowing the risk was death, hope survived. A stubborn flame burning brightly in a world that had denied them their freedom, the scale of this tragedy is almost impossible to comprehend. Over the course of centuries, more than 12 million African people were captured and forced onto those ships. And that staggering number doesn't even include the millions more who died during the raids, on the long march to the coast, or in the holding pens while waiting for the ships to arrive. Entire societies in Africa were destabilized and weakened. Families were erased from existence. Rich histories and cultures were violently interrupted. The wealth generated from their stolen labor was immense. It fueled the growth of empires, powered the Industrial Revolution, and built the economies of nations across the Americas and Europe. All this prosperity was built on the backs of enslaved people, who were left with nothing but physical and psychological scars that would echo for generations to come. The end of the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen quietly or easily. It was brought about through the tireless efforts of abolitionists, the courage of those who helped others escape, and most importantly, through the constant resistance and rebellion of the enslaved people themselves, their unbreakable, well, their refusal to believe they were less than human, ultimately helped to dismantle the system that oppressed them, and even now, centuries later, the echoes of this history remain. We see it in the vibrant cultures that were forged in the crucible of slavery. We see it in the ongoing struggles for equality and civil rights. We see it in the fight for dignity and justice that continues to this day. Because slavery was not just a chapter in a history book. It was a deep wound inflicted upon humanity. And remembering it, understanding its brutality and its lasting impact is the first, most crucial step toward healing. Thank you for joining me on this difficult but important journey through history. If you found this video meaningful, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others, so we can all continue to learn from the past.